Hello, all. Hi. I'm coming on here because I wanted to talk about my process when it comes to creating a new era and creating a new record or an album. I have a couple steps that I do that I feel like are important and can honestly make or break an album. This goes for anybody. If you are an indie artist like me and you're trying to find ways to really make your album feel whole, or stuff like that, maybe this could help. I don't know. This is just what I do, and I don't know. First off, I find it personally the best thing to do is to figure out, okay, what is this going to be about? A lot of the time for me, when I just start to kind of put old songs together and try and create an album off of it, I don't like it. Because I'm just like, I have no idea what this is about. I just threw a bunch of crap together. Don't know what it's about. And obviously I love the songs that I've written, but that can make your album feel lackluster. You can almost make it feel like, oh, I'm just putting this out because I need to put out music. Or, there's not any authenticity behind it. Obviously, if you're trying to make a mixtape or something like that, then, that's a different story. A lot of time mixtapes don't have a story about it, or, cohesivity, if that's even a word. They're just songs. And I know some people, they're not like me, that like to make full-on, trackless stories and, make full-on stories in my albums. But I think for me, my best thing to do is to figure out what it's going to be about. Figure out what I'm trying to tell throughout however long my track list is going to be. Stuff like that, I think that's very important. And through that, you can figure out, okay, well, what is it going to look like? So my second step is always aesthetic or visual. This is like, for me, I'm a very visual person. A lot of people that follow me or know my music, they don't know y'all don't know how long it takes for me to really hone in on just an album photo. And I know, that's a hard thing, but for me, if the album cover is not indicative of what the whole album is about, I can't choose it. It has to be not only what the whole album is about, but what the overall aesthetic is, because the album cover is going to be your stepping stone for promotional images, for what is the if you were gonna produce a record, what are all the photos in there gonna look like? What are the music videos gonna look like? What are stuff like that. The album photo is gonna be what influences everything else. That's just my process. I think that if once you have your album photo, you have your color palette, which is another thing. I think color palettes are so important in albums. They're just, because a lot of the time, especially nowadays with, people that are, or artists that are really big, that have a couple albums, when you see a certain color, you think of that album. You know what I mean? You're like, oh, this is the color palette for this album or this album. And I think that's what makes it so important, is you want people to almost just recognize your work just by what the color is, or what the photos look like, what your promotional photos look like. It needs to have its trademark, its signature, just by looking. And humans are very visual people, and so a lot of the time the music industry isn't just hearing. It's 50% music and 50% visual, okay? There would be, if we didn't have visuals for music, I feel like, music is still great, but, we are people that we have imagination, we visualize things anyways. So if you put out an album that doesn't have any cohesive visuals or doesn't have any visuals at all, that's fine. But it's going to make it really hard for people to really latch onto it because it doesn't have any iconic things about it. It doesn't have an iconic color palette. It doesn't have, you don't think of a music video when you hear the album or hear about the album because there's no cohesivity. For me, aesthetic is it's incredibly important. It means almost, it could make or break an album for me, and not even just for my music, but for other people's music too. If I see an artist and I've never heard of, or someone that I know, that I listen to, they're coming out with a new album, and the aesthetics aren't matching, or or it doesn't really, the visuals don't pull at me, I'm gonna be like, I don't really know if I'm interested in that. And a lot of the time too, same with books. That saying, don't judge a book by its cover. Well, people do. Okay, and that's the same thing with music. I'm a victim of this, but I have definitely judged an album based off of what it looks like and expected it to be good, and it's not good, and vice versa. And so it really it depends. I like to, make sure that the album photo looks good and the music. So it really just depends on what you're going for, but I'm kind of rambling. But for me, personally, the aesthetic is incredibly important. And that goes on to the next step, which is track list. So this is kind of having to do with aesthetic too, in a way. They kind of all go together, but the track list is incredibly important. Incredibly important. Because if your song titles aren't good, people aren't going to want to listen to them. Your songs need to have iconic parts to them themselves. So, I think that a track list, just the way that your songs are put in a certain order is important. Like, you don't want to put a ballad, as the third song in your album. That's going to be the start, the middle, or the end. And that's just me. That's just how I do it. But you're not going to want to put a really heavy, almost ending sounding song somewhere random in the album. That just is not. It's like telling a story. You need to have the beginning, middle, and end. And a lot of the time, I feel like, especially indie creators and artists, sometimes I've noticed that's kind of hard. And I'm not a perfect person. It's not like I'm saying I've aced this or anything. It took me a long time to figure out the stuff that I know about how I want my music. But I think that, track lists are a lot like aesthetics, where if it doesn't make it, it's going to break it. And, I just think that's important. So track lists are incredibly important. The way that they flow together, the way that you put each song, the way that they sound in a certain order is important. Not just even the titles. You need to, just the way that the album flows together. It needs to sound like it's going in the right direction. And that goes with song titles too, like I was saying. Similar with aesthetic, you want your song titles to go with the aesthetic of your album. If your album is really bright and nice, you don't want your song titles to be dull. You know what I mean? You want them to go with it. And just again, this is how I think. Obviously, if you do this and it works for you, all the power to you. But this is how I do my music and how I judge people's music based off of if I'm going to listen to it or not, if I think I'm going to like it or not, just as a consumer myself, as a listener. And then the last one is verbiage, or the way that you talk about your album. Okay, this is important too. So like for promotional things, the way that you talk about your album, the way that you just, even if you're making an Instagram post, like, the way that you talk about it is very important. You know, you don't want to, it's the same thing with how your people are going to remember it, right? If it's a very serious album, most of the time you want the way you talk about it to be serious. You want it to be, this is a very vulnerable thing for me to make, you know. You want it to be like that, not, oh, this was fun and stuff like that, you know what I mean? You want the way that you talk about it to kind of go with the way that you are marketing it, or the way that your album is. So I think that's important too. It's not super important, but I think it's, you know, it's a good way to make everything, it's full circle. So yeah, but that's just kind of how I make albums and how I make eras. I always start with what it's going to be about, and then from there I go to what is it going to look like, what is the palette going to look like, and from there I go to, okay, well, what are the songs going to be, obviously. What am I going to write for them, you know, what is the order, what is the story going to be, and then the way that I talk about it too comes after. So it kind of just, once you mash all those things together, it's really easy to just kind of make like a full cohesive album. And I'm an extra person. I like to make full-on stories and stuff and make storylines in my albums, and I'm not saying you got to do that, but those interesting things that you can do, you know, like make it a story album, or make it just make it interesting, you know what I mean? But also it's important to stick to, how are other people going to view this? And so yeah, that's just kind of my process. I think it's important to talk about this because, you know, I mean, I'm an indie artist just like other indie artists, and I think, you know, indie artists should help each other out and support each other. And so yeah, I think it's just, it's cool once you start to kind of experiment and can kind of figure out those things. It becomes really easy and fun to kind of like figure out, okay, what's gonna go with this, what's gonna go with this album, what is it gonna sound like, you know. A lot of the time people don't realize that our senses come with albums. It's not just our ears, you know. We, of course we hear it, and of course your album makes it sound good, you know, but what is it gonna look like, what is it gonna feel like, you know, those kind of things are very important. So I don't really know why I'm making this video. I just thought it would be interesting to talk about, because it's something I'm very passionate about, and I think just it's very, very important, and it's important to me. This is what I do every time I make an album. So next time I make an album, be on the lookout that I have all my 4 steps in there. I promise you they will be there. And yeah, also my new single 2006 comes out November 15th. Subtle, what's it called? I don't know. Self-promotion. And yeah, I really like it, and I hope you like it too. I'm really excited for this new era and the way that it's gonna sound and look like. So yeah, bye.